Michael Quinn Sullivan is the president of Empower Texans and Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. And Michael is also a partner of mine in the Life, Liberty, and Property Tour. Michael Quinn Sullivan is down in Austin and across the state holding elected officials accountable, particularly leadership, and they don't like it much. So I can tell you that all the conservative grassroots groups are going to come under fire from the big government people, the progressives, the establishment types in Austin, and they're sending their ethics watchdogs after us. Guess what? We're not going to stop what we're doing. So we're probably going to be in for some big battles, but I could not be happier than to be in the battle with my good friend Michael Quinn Sullivan. Michael?
Thank you, Joanne. Well, thank you all for letting me be with you today. I think y'all must have really upset, the scheduling gods that you had to hear me this past weekend and now today. I mean, that's people earn a medal for that or something. But I appreciate the chance to be here and to chat a little bit about the election results and kind of give you at least our view of what's coming ahead. As Joanne noted, you will forgive my tardiness. I'm driving a rent vehicle because a deer decided that it wanted to commit suicide by F-150 earlier in the week. And as I noted, my F-150 is reparable. The deer, on the other hand, not so much. I was chastised by the staff for not having, thrown it in the back of my pickup and brought it in for venison burgers or something, but just roadkill just stopped appealing to me at some point or other in my life. And speaking of roadkill, thank goodness we never have to mention the name again of that person who only got 38.7% of the vote. She is gone. A couple quick takeaways just from looking at the results. We're talking about the stuff that matters. One, we were all told to be scared of Battleground Texas. We were all told that this is the force, and lots of people raised lots of money around Battleground Texas. We were, Joanne and I think both, were kind of the skunks at the party, as she said earlier, saying, I don't know. Let's see, you've got a guy from Chicago coming to Texas who hates Texas to sell Texans on buying the Obama brand, where Texans want the Obama brand. I didn't see the strategic. I couldn't see the path to victory there. And as it turned out, I hope they keep doing what they did. I don't want them to leave now. I want them to stay. This is an outfit that managed to spend millions and millions and millions on Wendy Davis, and yet she got functionally no more votes than a guy named Jim Hogan, who was the Ag Commission candidate for the Democratic Party, who spent no money. He didn't campaign. He didn't even go to his own party's convention. That's how little he did. And yet he and Wendy Davis got pretty much the same thing. So congratulations to Battleground Texas. Congratulations to all of you nice leftists in New York and in Los Angeles. I'm glad you spent your money so well. Please keep doing that. If they do it one more time, we might have 7 Democrats left in the state of Texas. The map that has been going around of looking at how the counties voted is very instructive. Democrats got 10 fewer counties this time than in 2010. 10 fewer counties. So remember all the hoopla. And those are counties. That's not Smith County. Y'all weren't Democrats 4 years ago. Okay. Those are the counties and the places where we were told, you gotta have, a squishy Republican, or else that county just won't go for it. It was down in South Texas. Hispanics will never vote for Republicans. And yet those are the very counties that flipped. Those are the very counties that moved to the Republican column. Now, Republican doesn't always mean conservative, but sometimes it does. And certainly, I think the case of our statewide ticket, it clearly means that. Voters who had not had the opportunity to see what a full, solid, well-developed conservative statewide ticket finally got to see one. And they compared that to the other team's ticket and went, ew, gross. So I think the challenge, though, for each one of us as citizens, as the people in charge, is to make sure now that our governor, our lieutenant governor, our comptroller, our attorney general, our ag commissioner, our railroad commissioner, our land commissioner, all of them know that they better darn well deliver on what they promised, or else those counties will say, you know, there's no difference. May as well be comfortable with where we were, rather than, you know, this new thing we tried to do. I think it's now incumbent on those members, on those elected officials, to deliver on their promises, perhaps even more so for the sake of those parts of the state than for any other. But for them to do that is going to require each one of us demanding it. Each one of us are going to have to step up our game. You know, I am embarrassed to hear that Joanne got to have a morning without being on the phone and drink her coffee. You know, that's horrible. Maybe once a week is okay. You and I should be working a lot harder starting today than we were all fall. You and I have got to be a lot more aggressive in the governing of our state. We as conservatives have for far too long said, oh, I'm going to go find me a good leader. I'm going to hire him. I'm going to put him in office. And yeah, I mean, you guys have done a pretty good job, you know, with Matt Schaefer, and hopefully you'll have better luck the next time you go hiring a state senator. But it's not sufficient, though, to simply hire well. It's, you know, you're not a good manager, you're not a good employer if all you do is hire well. As the folks in charge, you and I have to manage well as well. You know, there are all sorts of great businesses that have hired the most talented people, and yet the business implodes within a year because they weren't well managed. And I think that's where the conservative movement often is. You know, we hire someone who talks a good game and might even believe it, but then you and I walk away. We go back to managing our business, playing with our kids and grandkids, going on a trip, watching American Idol, whatever we do. And while we walk away, the other team doesn't. It's why we live in a state where almost 2/3 of the public has voted for the conservative. The voting public, 1/3 has voted for the liberal. In the Texas House, 2/3 functionally of the Texas House claim to be conservatives. Functionally, 2/3 of the Senate claims to be conservatives. And yet, we have seen for multiple legislative sessions, we have watched very milquetoast, I would argue, conservative reforms, very easy 60, 70, 80% issues across the board reforms languish and die while leftist legislation moves forward. Mark Jones, professor of political science at Rice University, did a study of the legislation that moved in the last session. And the report that he did was called Red State, Purple Legislation. And he made the point that most of the legislation that moved out was Democrat legislation. In fact, Democrats, according to hardhatters.com, 51% of the legislation that passed in the Texas House that ended up going to the governor's office was sponsored by Democrats. 51%. They have 1/3 of the Texas House, but they passed 51% of all legislation. That should be a little frustrating to us. But I would suggest in no small part, is that a reflection of the fact that if you walk the halls of the Capitol, which I tend to not do, I don't like being around any of those people. My trigger finger starts to feel happy, and so I feel like I need to go elsewhere. But anyway, I probably shouldn't say that when it's being recorded, but anyway, that's okay. I'm on more watch lists than I care to count most days. But I suggest you, when you walk around the Capitol, what you find is that far too many people like me have said, I don't want to be around those folks, and we go find something else to do. And far too many of the leftists show up. So I would probably dare to venture that on any given day of the legislative session, 51 or 52 or 55 or 60 or some percentage of the human beings that are in the state's capital, which is not the same as elected officials, they're a subset of humanity. The human beings who are at the Capitol are not conservatives. You can throw a rock in any direction and hit someone who is there lobbying for bigger government, for bigger programs, for more spending, for more regulations, for new fees, new revenue sources, and on down the line. So they show up. And what do we know about any contest of any sort? You only have the chance of winning when you show up. And you always fail when you don't show up. So I would suggest that that's in no small part why we have seen big wins at the ballot box and yet precious few wins in policy reforms. It's because we've done a good job of convincing, our, one-eyed, one-legged girlfriend from high school, to show up and vote on election day, or to, vote earlier, to mail in a ballot. We made it all very easy. But then we haven't similarly encouraged her and our neighbors and our family and our friends and whoever else to show up in the government. That we're showing up at the ballot box, but we're not showing up for the government. I'd suggest if we're going to see reforms this session, to Joanne's point, you and I have got to show up a lot more regularly. And it's uncomfortable. It's not fun. Austin is a weird place. They exalt in that. But you and I have got to be there because the other team is showing up. Our little coalition, the Life, Liberty, and Property Coalition, is going to try to help with that. Because quite frankly, when you show up, everybody knows Andy Griffith. There's a fantastic skit that Andy Griffith did years ago, or a monologue called "And They Called It Football." I encourage you to go on YouTube and find "And They Called It Football." And it's Andy Griffith in his best, Appalachia hillbilly persona, describing coming across a football game. And it's the funniest thing you ever see, because he didn't know the rules and all this. So he didn't know what he was watching, and the way he describes it is great. Well, that's a lot of the way the legislative process is to human beings. You show up and you try to pay attention to what's happening on the floor of the House, the Senate. You go into committees, and it's like you know all the words, but none of them make sense. They're in the wrong order. They have different definitions. So what our little coalition is doing, we're calling it the First Amendment Tuesdays. First Amendment Tuesdays. Every Tuesday during the legislative session, we're going to have an opportunity for citizens to come in, learn about the legislative process, spend 20 or 30 minutes getting a briefing on the rules, on the procedures of the Texas legislature, get a briefing on the actual legislation that's being heard that week, and give you an idea of what committees are relevant to which issues, and then find out what questions you have, what issues you're going to be there, that you're caring about that week, so we can help point you in the right direction. Every Tuesday, First Amendment Tuesdays. Now, when you say First Amendment, of course, we think dirty words on television, we think, dirty magazines being sold at the Walmart, whatever. No. It's not what the Founding Fathers meant. The Founding Fathers, they talked about First Amendment, of course, they were talking about freedom to speech politically, to print politically, to gather politically, to worship, to assemble, to petition. All those things is what they were discussing in the First Amendment. And so we want to empower folks to be more effective in their communications with their elected officials in the real-time act of governing, to learn the rules, to understand the procedures of the Texas legislature. So if you want to know more about that, you can go to our website, empowertexans.com, and we will sign up there and we'll send you information. Also, Grassroots will get information out to you, and if you're on the Life, Liberty, and Property Tour list, you'll get information from there, and Facebook and Twitter and all those different ways. We'll make sure folks know the locations and the times as we get closer to the session. But no process or procedure of the day in and day out of the legislative session is more important than the very first vote on the very first day of the legislative session. The very first vote, the very first day of the legislative session will be the vote on leadership of the Texas House of Representatives. That's going to be the most important vote your legislator takes. Now, there are a good number of conservatives who are saying, oh, well, I'm going to be a conservative all session long. But for the first vote, I'm going to vote with the Democrats. That's what they're saying. Now, they're not actually saying it exactly that way, but that's what they're saying. Who are saying they want to just go ahead and keep Joe Strauss as the Speaker of the House. Joe Strauss, who was put in place by the Democrats, who gets his power from the Democrats. The people who lost 10 more counties, who couldn't get a statewide candidate over 39%. And yet, there are a good number of Republicans who think that they need to go along with Joe Strauss as Speaker of the House because, well, that's who the Democrats want. In my mind, that's a reason to be against him. If the Democrats tell us that they are for motherhood and apple pie, I'm going to question those two things. And I would suggest that we should do likewise politically and demand that our state House members do likewise. That first vote of the legislative session, if they keep Joe Strauss in power, all the other babble that these Republican members want to issue forth about, oh, I'm with you on everything else, our response needs to be, how? How? Because you've stacked the deck against conservative results with your first vote. You have precluded the opportunity for success with the first vote. What we know from the last 3 legislative sessions has been that Joe Strauss appoints committee chairs who kill conservative legislation. That's what they've done. Now, Joe Strauss and the Democrats and the enablers in the Republican Party have benefited up until the first Tuesday of January 2015. They have benefited from having a leftist-friendly state Senate. Oops. The world shifted under their feet. The state Senate, you've now got a strong conservative and Dan Patrick as the lieutenant governor. You've got 6 new conservatives coming into the Texas House. You've got Jane Nelson, strong conservative, going to be chairing the Senate Finance Committee. Suddenly the world's a very different place on the east side of the Capitol, where the Senate resides. The Senate is going to be a more action-oriented, reform-minded conservative body. So the House isn't going to have that cover. So what has the response been from our friends within the Surrender Caucus? They have said that, well, fortunately, we've got Joe Strauss as Speaker, because Joe Strauss will block their words, those conservatives in the Senate. Jason Villalba, a state rep from Dallas County, told an audience that it was important, in fact, that Joe Strauss remained as Speaker because, and he's a Republican, if I didn't say that, he's a Republican, said it's important to keep Joe Strauss as Speaker because there are going to be all these, his words, slash and burn conservatives in the Texas Senate. Now, after hearing this, I've heard that phrase before. Oh, that's how Nancy Pelosi refers to all Republicans. They're slash and burn. So here is Jason Villalba, a Republican, referring to the state Senate as a bunch of slash and burn conservatives. You know, the stage has been set. They have explained it clearly. The Texas House is going to be the place where conservative reforms go to die. So as you're interacting with state reps, as you're interacting with your state rep and with the neighbors, when you're talking to your friends and your family and your one-eyed, one-legged girlfriend from high school and all those people, make sure they know not to allow their state rep to get away with saying, well, Joe Strauss will be different this time. Joe Strauss, he really heard the message of the election this time. You know, I'm all about giving people second chances. My patience gets a little tried on the third and fourth chance. And that's where we are. In the past, we have not had a candidate who has been willing to challenge Strauss to the floor of the Texas House, either willing or able to do so. Scott Turner, young state rep from Collin and Rockwell counties, has said he's absolutely going to take it all the way to the floor of the Texas House. And I think that is a vote that you need to be watching very carefully. That's a vote you need to make sure your friends and your family and everyone else out around the state, when they're talking to those areas, know they need to communicate. I'm watching very carefully that vote, because it's going to be a vote. What's been very fascinating now to listen to, after Mr. Turner has been saying this all around the state, I've heard him speak 4 or 5 times, and he references there's going to be a vote. He keeps saying it. His supporters keep saying there's going to be a vote. Now we're starting to hear a very troubling tactical maneuver being discussed by the supporters of Joe Strauss. Actually, two different maneuvers. And both of them have the aroma of a good idea, but I would suggest it's aroma of something else. The first maneuver they're discussing is, well, we should just have a caucus vote. We should have a caucus vote. And, you know, some go, oh yeah, let the caucus decide. The Republican caucus. Problem with the Republican caucus is twofold. Number one, it's not legally binding. There's no requirement that what happens in the caucus translates into a vote on the floor of the legislature. Part of that is, the reason for that is because the caucus votes are private. It's not the Republican caucus and Democratic caucus are not government organizations. They can gather in caucus and they can do all sorts of things, and you and I aren't allowed in to watch, so that we can't see who voted how. It's all done in secret. All right, down to secret ballots in the caucus, so we don't really know who voted how. So they can come home and lie to us. Now, I saw this in full force several years ago when Ken Paxton made a very short-term, made the decision kind of on the fly to challenge Strauss for speaker. Everyone said, oh, you got to do it in caucus, got to do it in caucus. And so, okay, no one knew better at the time. There'd never been this kind of challenge before. Goes into caucus, and 30 members, by all counts, all sides say, 30 members said they supported Ken Paxton for speaker. I have since heard 50 members of that legislature say they were among the 30 who stood. Now, look, I'm an Aggie, but even I get 50, 30 are 2 different numbers. Methinks 20 are lying. Okay? But when they do things in secret, they can lie to us. They can tell us whatever we want to hear, and we have no way to stop it. So that's the first idea. So let's go to caucus. Let's do it in caucus. The other idea that's being floated is, well, let's just avoid, don't mess with the caucus. Let's just have a secret vote on the floor of the Texas House. Hand out little pieces of paper, and everyone, circle the name and fold up the piece of paper 6 ways and drop it in a hat and shake up the hat and stir it up, and that way no one knows who I voted for. Joanne, that's a great idea. Because this way there's no intimidation possible. That's a great idea. So maybe, since you don't want the intimidation that comes from voting for speaker with a secret ballot, maybe a similar good idea would be to have a secret vote for, say, a tax increase. Because you wouldn't want the intimidation to come from the lobby if you voted against a tax increase, right? Or maybe we should have a secret vote for eminent domain. To go through and tell your county commissioner, we'll set this presence to your county commissioners, your city council, school board, they can start taking property without having to put their name on the ballot, without having to be held accountable for it. That's a good idea, isn't it? These are the ideas these, jackanapes are seriously discussing. They're seriously putting these forward as a way to avoid accountability. Now, I would suggest to you that you and I should be diligent in calling out absolutely not to either one of those. Because quite frankly, there are servants, and they need to remember that. And the nice thing about hiring a servant instead of appointing a ruler about hiring a servant is it's kind of like hiring an employee in your business. You have the constant opportunity for accountability. And you know, I'll be crass and direct, there actually should be intimidation involved when it comes to the picking of legislative leadership. There should absolutely be some concern about retribution involved with the selection of who is the third most important constitutional officer of the Texas House. And it should be coming from the voters. The problem that we face in Austin, whether you're talking about the speakership or you're talking about renaming highways, the problem we constantly run into is that your members of the Texas House are more scared of the Austin lobby than they are of their voters. And that is not healthy. That is not healthy. You know, the old quote from one of the founders, I forget who said it, was when the people fear their government, there is tyranny. When government fears the people, there is liberty. Okay? I think that's probably true. Now I would suggest that the same can be said of good public policy. Bad public policy occurs when our state representatives and state senators fear the lobby more than they fear their voters. The way, though, they will come to fear their voters and do right by the people is if you and I are showing up more regularly. If they see all of us walking the halls, dragging our baseball bats, tire irons, pitchforks, brooms, rolling pins, whatever behind us. When they see us there day in and day out, it's going to be a little more intimidating to them. Right now, all they see are the lobbyists, the grow government crowd. You and I need to be showing up a lot more in the Texas House. Victory will come by our presence as surely in the legislative process as in the election process. The map of Texas is not a stop sign red. The map of Texas says that the people want an aggressive reform agenda. The map of Texas says that 60-some% of our fellow Texans expect real results. I would suggest to you those results will only happen when you and I are showing up loud, early, and often from the first day of the session until it's ending. Happy to answer any questions you might have about the process, about maybe specific issues, about the election, whatever.
Michael,
Yes,
would
ma'am.
go back over how many of Strauss's lieutenants have decided, would you go through the scenario of how some of them have decided not to run for re-election and why you believe that to be true, and that we have gained a lot of ground with retiring some of those people?
I mean, to Mrs. Fleming's point, the question was, kind of the history of what's happened to the supporters of Speaker Strauss. Over the past 2 cycles, no one who takes a public position in opposition to Joe Strauss has lost an election. No one. No one. No one has lost an election who has opposed Joe Strauss. No one. Okay? No one. Anywhere. At all. On the other hand, the supporters of Joe Strauss, they have lost through retirement at the ballot box, something like going on a dozen House members, folks who stood with Joe Strauss and found themselves defeated as a result of it. And the closer you stand, the more likely you are to fail. And it's been very, very peculiar. Look, in every self-defense class and things I've taken over the years, this message always ends up coming through that watch what your enemy attacks, because that's their weak spot. That's number one. Number two is that when attacked, people can always be counted on to protect themselves first. Okay. So this past cycle, we saw something very exciting. Actually, past two cycles, saw something very exciting happen. There was an opponent to Joe Strauss 2 years ago, in the last primary 2 years ago, and who spent something like $110,000, $115,000. He spent nothing, no money. I mean, just a very small amount of money in politics. Strauss spent $1 million on himself. Okay, that was money that couldn't go elsewhere. So guess what happened? A good number of his, of his friends ended up losing an election. He protected himself rather than protecting them. The same thing happened again this cycle. A couple of Strauss's close folks were attacked. 6 of them ended up losing. Jim Keffer, Eastland, Texas, probably one of the closest guys to Strauss. Keffer had a very strong challenge, guy who came very close to winning. I think is going to run again. Keffer not only spent out his campaign war chest approaching $1 million, he also had all the lobby come in and work the polls for him and all these things. People who could have gone to other places, but because he sucked them to himself, these other folks lost. So the Strauss team, when you talk to lawmakers who say, well, I'm going to need them to protect me, the question you kind of have to ask them is, really? Are they really going to protect you? Can you show me evidence that they can protect you? Because they couldn't protect the guys who are ideologically aligned with them, who they really would rather have in the legislature. What the blazes makes you think they're going to do anything other than pat you on the head and say, via con Dios? I mean, I think that's it's a very practical political question. So we've had 6 defeats of Strauss guys in this cycle. Another 20 retired this year. They retired, many of them actually said in various ways, I don't want the challenge. I know I'm going to get challenged, and I just don't have the fight left in me. So they went away. A lot of those seats were then filled by conservatives, by real honest-to-goodness conservatives. So, the numbers have gotten better. We have built better numbers of real constitutional conservatives in the Texas House. The problem, though, has just been that because you and I aren't showing up the day after the election like we do the days before an election, those folks start feeling fearful of the lobby rather than of the people. They start wanting to gain the approval of the Austin Un-American Socialist newspaper. They start wanting to be invited to the cool lobby hangouts and to have the nice dinners, and their spouses want to be invited to the cool Christmas parties and all those kind of things because you and I aren't showing up. So I'd suggest that's where showing up matters. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Got him.
Oh, uh-oh. A stack.
Am I on?
Am I on? So the party's at your house all year, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you name some specific House members who should be particularly targeted for persuasion regarding the Strauss-Turner race?
Dan Flynn.
Yeah, I think that's, in your neighborhood, I would absolutely say Dan Flynn. Dan Flynn's a guy who, has always been thought of as a conservative. His record kind of slipped this past session. I think in large part because, he was suddenly sitting at the table with he was sitting in the same room with the cool kids. They had him at the little kids' table, but at least he was in the room with them now. He was at the folding card table with the paper plates instead of the china, but he could at least hear the jokes that were being told, And so his record, because he didn't want to lose that. His record kind of slipped by all the different conservative votes because he started having to vote with the Strauss team because he was on their team. In his heart, I think Dan Flynn is a conservative. I think that he's kind of lost his way, and I'll tell you, as evidence of his lost way, remember, he came out loud, proud, and strong to keep the second most liberal Republican in the Texas Senate, Bob Dewar. And his home county went 60-40 for the next state senator, Bob Hall. You know, so Dan Flynn has lost touch. And, you know, just because look, I've got lots of friends I've lost touch with over the years, and then we get back in touch. People can be, they can be reclaimed. And I think having that first conversation, like he's going to be a state rep, period, in January, February, March, April, May. He's going to be a state rep. So, make the effort to reclaim him. But he should probably also know that 60% of his constituents voted for the other guy in that state Senate race, and that might inspire people to run against him next time. That should be politically troubling to him. Give him a practical reason to do the right thing first, a political reason. A couple others, Larry Phillips, who's kind of up to the north of you, someone else who's very much on the Strauss team. Larry Phillips wants to run for state senate at some point soon. That would be against Craig Estes, who's from Wichita Falls, so kind of weird geography. But there's some guys like that who should be targeted. There are some of our firebrand conservatives from last time, like Ron Simmons and Giovanni Capriglione, have started flirting with, maybe we just want to be on the winning team. We maybe, they're getting word awards. They should probably maybe tell, no, look, you said you were conservative, act like one. And a lot of it is very irrational. I'm going to go back to it. A lot of it's very irrational because there is zero evidence that standing with Joe Strauss does anything other than harm your integrity, in the case of Dan Flynn, or harm your political future, as in the case of 25 some odd folks. So don't do it. But they had this irrational, I've got to be with them or else I'll get in trouble. Well, I don't think so. Let me know, just to close the circle. Look who was promoted to statewide office this time. You had a bunch of guys who weren't Strauss guys. You had a bunch of Strauss guys seeking statewide office. Maybe the closest thing to Joe Strauss on a statewide actual ballot, not a poll, but on the ballot, was Dan Branch. Dan Branch and Joe Strauss have been friends since they were little kids. They are ideologically inseparable. Branch is a little more marketable in the sense he's just a little more personable and that sort of thing than Strauss. Both very wealthy families on down the line. They're almost identical to each other. If Joe Strauss had bigger eyebrows, they would have been identical twins probably. Voters had the opportunity to look at the record statewide of Joe Strauss in the form of Dan Branch. And they found it lacking to the extent that Dan Branch lost 60-40. 64-36 or whatever, I can't remember the final vote number. So that should be telling to a lot of these guys that, closest to it, Harvey Hildebrand, lost, didn't even make the runoff for comptroller. Eric Opiella and Tommy Merritt, y'all, East Texas. I miss Tommy Merritt because he was just so laughable. But anyway, thank goodness he's not ag commissioner. Eric Opiella was Strauss's lawyer, and Tommy Merritt, they're in the inner circle of the Team Strauss. Neither one of them got to be ag commissioner. They both ran against similar people. So, I think that there's a whole lot of evidence that also points to the fact that, not only are you in danger of not retaining your House seat, but you're going to not have the opportunity to advance. Maybe somebody can say, I don't want to advance. Bull. Anyone who puts their name on a ballot wants the next space up on the ballot. Every member, except for maybe Mr. Schaefer, every member who, and we'll talk about that later, every member of the Texas House, almost every member, gets up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says, "Good morning, Mr. President." That's who a lot of these folks are. There's nothing wrong. Nothing wrong with ambition. Everyone wants to get a pay raise. Everyone wants to get a promotion at work. So there's nothing wrong with that. And so it's where you just have to appeal to them and say, if you want to move up, look who has and hasn't been moving up. Dan Flynn, Larry Phillips, Ron Simmons, Giovanni Capriglione. Those are 4 names I'd give you off the top of my head.
Because we ask all the questions, I want everybody to see this is a blank card that we hold up when we walk around. I don't want you to think I'm not asking a question.
I thought you were going to ask me a blank question.
We know the party's at your house. Just tell us when so we can help. The first Tuesday of January is the time to stop Strauss. Contact our representatives prior to this.
You should be talking to your state rep immediately.
My bad.
And you should be encouraging everyone on your Christmas card list to be doing likewise. Everyone you went to high school with. The guy from across the street who you're not sure where he went, get on Google and Facebook and find him. And get him to also make, this is the time to, and in the same way, this is the time to be talking to him about property taxes and every other issue. This is the time. There is not ever a time to not be talking about your elected officials, about legislative leadership, about policy outcomes, about policy problems. You and I have to be constantly engaged, but for the purpose of the hiring and firing of lawmakers, for the purpose of accountability. I would argue it is very important for each one of us to have, to set clear markers in advance of the work starting of what we expect. When you build a house, you tell the contractor, I want it by this date, I want the walls to have these colors, I want the floor to have this kind of carpeting, I want it to be level, I want it to not leak, all these kind of things that I expect of you. And if it's not, guess what you won't be getting? You won't be getting the bonus, you won't be getting the paycheck, I'm gonna file a lawsuit against you. All these kind of the quid pro quos, getting things done. Well, you have to have the same conversation with your legislator. What you expect and what you individually are going to be rehiring or firing based around.
Is there a tactically strong group of legislators organized and ready to beat Joe Strauss?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, Mom.
Is there a tactically strong group of legislators organized and ready to beat Joe Strauss?
That's a question you'd have to talk to some of the legislators more about. Like any election, no one is supposed to win an election when they file for the seat. There's this, the idea is, when Matt Schaefer put his name on the ballot, everyone went until about 9 p.m. the night the votes were counted. They went, oh, So that's that's kind of the way of every election, and every candidate has to go about the deal. Regardless what we're running for, state rep or dog catcher or city council or speaker or whatever. You got to surround yourself with advisors, with tacticians, with strategists, with vendors and everything else. And look, I would encourage each one of you to have the conversation with your state rep. Call up Scott Turner, call up whoever, and say, hey, I want to be in the fight. Put me in, coach. Ready to play. I think that the team that develops around Scott Turner is whatever is going to be whoever steps up to volunteer.
Greg Abbott got 53% of the Hispanic male vote. Doesn't this kill the argument for amnesty from the rhinos?
I think that lots of mainstream myths got shattered with this election. We were told that if Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton were the Republican nominees for Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General, it would turn Texas blue. Well, that didn't work out so much. We were told that this election was a referendum on women's health care issues, which means killing babies. And so they got themselves the referendum poster child for women's health care issues, which is really killing babies. And 54% of women voted for Greg Abbott. So what did they say? Confuse the message. And the same thing's true with the Hispanic vote. We were told that there is no way that the Republican Party was doomed if you had this ticket of Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton Glenn Hager and, go down the line of all these guys. Oh, it was doom, doom, doom. Hispanics would be turning out in droves to kick out these, law and order, board of security, conservatives. Oops. 10 Democratic districts, heavily Hispanic districts, counties, flipped from D to R. Oops. 50-some% of Hispanic males voted for, voted not just for Abbott, but for all these guys. Oops. That's problems for them.
Do you think Greg Abbott would sign the conservative reforms that we need in Texas? Do you think Texas will balance the budget in the next legislative session and pay off some of the debt that the state of Texas has?
I think the worst thing that has happened with the inevitability storyline around Greg Abbott has been most folks kind of have this, okay, we know he was predestined to be governor and that he was absolutely going to be governor and there's no way around it. He was going to be governor. So what does he stand? But he doesn't stand for anything. Well, the irony has been that Greg Abbott's campaign has put forward more policy white papers than any gubernatorial campaign I think I've ever seen anywhere in the country. Strong language, practical, down into nuts and bolts kind of stuff. So I am very comfortable with the idea that Greg Abbott is going to be signing the good stuff that gets to him. Now, the liability with Greg Abbott's personality type is, the guy has spent a lot of his career putting on a black robe and sitting on a bench and waiting to see what stupid arguments and what good arguments came to him, which judges are not supposed to be activists. And so that's kind of ingrained in him. So how active this mindset will be kind of remains to be seen. But I am supremely confident that, if we can have the House and the Senate, well, it goes the other direction, the Senate and the House passing good legislation. The Senate's going to pass good legislation. The question mark is on the House. I am confident good legislation gets signed by Greg Abbott. You asked then about debt, or the balanced budget. The budget's going to be balanced. In Texas, the budget is always balanced. When the fish says to you, "Look how well I swim, pat me on the back," I want that to be the first fish you eat. Okay? When a state rep or a state senator or any other, divine godlike being comes before you and says, "Well, we balanced the budget this year," you go, "Whoop-de-freaking-do, shut up and go away." Because constitutionally, they have to balance the budget. It is impossible to not balance the budget because we don't have a Xerox machine that pumps out $20 bills in Texas. Okay? So the budget's always balanced. Now, how they balance the budget, that's the question you and I should be asking. Are they going to balance the budget honestly or dishonestly? Up until now, we've mostly balanced the budget dishonestly. Okay? So our question needs to be not did you balance the budget, but are they going to balance the budget honestly? That is the question that Joanne Fleming does a better job of answering than I do. And that's the question where if Joanne Fleming thinks they might be tempting to do something dishonest, I'm going to be outside of that zip code because she's going to be just shooting people indiscriminately at that point, I think. So, but you can look at the fund games they play and switching dollars here and there. Greg Abbott has certainly made a very persuasive case that needs to stop immediately. Dan Patrick says it needs to stop immediately. Jay Nelson, that needs to stop immediately, like Senate Finance Chair. The House has kind of done, the current House leadership has been, then they need to go back to the cocktail room at the country club and regroup. Less optimism on that. Getting rid of the debt, the sad reality is that there is a fair amount of debt that the legislature has imposed. most of the debt in Texas we've done to ourselves, thank you very much. Hopefully, like some of the transportation debt, stuff like that, we can start to see addressed. That's only going to be addressed if you honestly balance the budget. So now you've got this money that then you can apply towards paying down debt. Same way, you got a big credit card bill and you spend your money in the month regularly, you can buy down the credit card bill. So that's, that is part of honestly balancing the budget. I'd suggest you also, though, this is where you and I need to start having a very uncomfortable conversation, with the dim-witted, moron in the mirror about, why didn't I vote in that election last May, for the school debt, for the city debt, for the county debt, for the hospital district debt, for the everybody else's debt. Why did I go along with that constitutional amendment doing debt? We need to have those conversations before it gets even further out of control. And 2/3 of Texas debt is held locally. There's not a whole lot your state legislature can do about 2%, or excuse me, about 98% of us not showing up, for the school bond election. Not much they can do about that. Or maybe there is. One reform that I've advocated for a while, we currently require under state law, every school district in the state can charterize itself. It can it can escape all of or a lot of the mandates, a lot of the onerous, burdensome regulations, all from the TEA. Now, you don't hear this from your school district folks, do you? They don't tell you they have already an easy way out of all the rules. Well, they don't tell you because they advocate for the rules, number one. Number two, though, they've made it so it's a little, even if you have some uppity superintendent or school board might want to do it, they put into state law back in the early 1990s a requirement that to charterize your school district, where you escape the state rules and regs, you have to have a 25% voter turnout in an election to do it. That is the only place in state law where we require a voter turnout for anything. If three people showed up for governor, for the gubernatorial election, those 3 people decide who the governor is for the whole state of Texas. That's the state of the law. Except for escaping regulations. Okay, so that exists. So that's already in law. I would ping all debt issuance in the state of Texas to that section of code. And I would say that if you're a school that wants to do debt, that's fine. That's great. Knock yourself out. If you people, in Tyler want to have a lot of school debt, that is fantastic. You got to have 25% turnout there. Yeah. And now you really do get closer to everyone in Tyler agreeing with a whole lot more debt. Okay, that's fine. And if you people want to do it yourselves, that's your business, not mine. That's the kind of reform that the legislature could do to address future debt.
I know we've talked about this, but I do ask all the questions. How can we best influence the speaker's race?
Phone calls. Letters. Big Chief tablet with a crayon is the best way to communicate with the state.
Any news?
No offense, Mr. Safer.
Any
You can use
news?
a ballpoint pen on your Big Chief tablets, Mr. Safer.
Any news concerning firearms?
My firearms? No, I'm kidding. My wife didn't tell me I had a break-in last night. May have been a discharge at the house I'm not aware of. I suspect that we see movement on new firearm legislation this session. 2 days ago, Greg Abbott said that if the legislature passed some form of open carry, he would support it, that he would sign it into law. It was a very early position he took and reaffirmed it. I think that you're going to see another go at the campus carry issue. It just boggles my mind that when we've got so many that you look at where violence is occurring, it's occurring almost exclusively in gun-free zones. And that makes sense. You know, if you want to go do something bad, you go where you have a greater chance of no one stopping you. You know, it's a good self-instinct kind of thing. You know, so I think that's where it just boggles my mind that the Texas House has continued to be obstructionist on that issue. So we'll, but again, I think with Greg Abbott as governor, I think we see that move forward.
What is the date of the first 2015 session of the Texas Legislature?
Tuesday, January the 13th, 12 noon is when they will get started. Just so you understand a little bit of the process, the first day of every legislative session, the first day, the Texas House is presided over by the Secretary of State. Okay, the Secretary of State, who's an appointed the governor, presides over the Texas House. Usually it's done by acclamation, the adoption of the rules of the previous session for the purpose of beginning business. You know, so she has everyone raise their right hand and everyone's little minions standing around all, hey, daddy, and all that kind of stuff. That's fun. Then they do this kind of vote of acclamation for the rules, and then they get into the speakership vote. It is possible this time around the speakership might be the second vote or third vote if you know, there is some maneuver done to change the temporary rules of the Texas House in advance of the speakership vote. And that's something we may know in advance, or, you know, at 12:02 p.m., Mr. Schaefer may be sitting there going, what did he just say? You know, or maybe it's Mr. Schaefer who's going to be saying, I don't know. You know, I mean, you know, so there's that kind of thing that can go on. But it's at 12 noon, so if you're interested in observing your 150 divine godlike, demigod-like figures in the Texas House, the godlike figures in the Senate, the demigod-like figures are in the House, then I would suggest being at the Texas Capitol a little on the early side if you want to get there to watch that. You know, they have precious little gallery seating for the public where we can look down upon them and smirk.
When and where will your Texas Tuesday briefings be held, and will they be broadcast live?
The briefings will be held at, we're going, because we all only do upscale, we're going to do the La Quinta conference room that is there on the southeast corner of kind of the Capitol complex. That might mean people are going to be really friendly with each other in there, you know, trying to, not sure how to, I mean, the forecast will be there. Whether we broadcast them or not is still an open question. It's a, you know, just technically and other things. You know, each one of our groups are small groups, so we manpower, resources, that kind of thing. But that is something we're discussing, is or at least making a general video available of the procedures briefing. That will kind of be the same every week, and the rules briefing and that sort of thing. Do that, make that sort of thing available, just so whenever folks come to town in advance, they can check that to see, how does this process work? Thank you very much.